The neighbors on Maple Street thought they knew him. They saw him every morning, walking to his mailbox in old sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. They watched him coach his daughter's softball team on weekends, cheering louder than any other parent. They waved at him when he mowed his lawn, and he always waved back with a small, polite smile. To them, he was just Raymond. A quiet man. A single father. Someone who kept to himself but never caused any trouble. They had no idea who he really was. For 18 years, Raymond had lived a life that most people only see in movies. He was a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite warriors the United States military had ever trained. He had completed missions in countries whose names were never written down. He had operated in the shadows, doing things that would never appear in any history book. His combat record was classified at the highest level, locked away in files that only a handful of people in the world had access to. He had seen things that would break most men. He had done things that still visited him in his sleep. But through it all, he had survived. Not because he was lucky, but because he was simply that good at what he did. But 3 years ago, everything changed. His wife, the love of his life, lost her battle with cancer. It was a fight that lasted 2 painful years, and Raymond was there for every single moment. He held her hand through the chemotherapy. He carried her to bed when she was too weak to walk. He told her stories to make her laugh when the pain became too much, and when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, something inside Raymond broke. He looked at his daughter, just 14 years old at the time, crying at her mother's bedside. In that moment, he made a decision. He was done with the military, done with the missions, done with the violence. His daughter needed him, and he was going to be there for her no matter what. So he walked away from it all. The transition was not easy. For months, Raymond struggled to adjust to normal life. He would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for a weapon that was not there. He would scan every room he entered, looking for threats out of habit. Loud noises made his heart race. Crowded places made him uncomfortable, but slowly, day by day, he learned to live differently. He traded his combat boots for sneakers. He swapped tactical briefings for parent-teacher conferences. Instead of planning operations, he planned birthday parties. Instead of leading teams of warriors, he coached a group of teenage girls who just wanted to have fun playing softball, and at the center of it all was his daughter, Kira. She was everything to him. She had her mother's eyes, warm and kind. She had her mother's laugh, bright and full of joy. But she also had her father's strength. Even after losing her mom, Kira found ways to smile. She worked hard in school. She helped around the house. She never complained, even when Raymond knew she was hurting inside. He made a promise to himself and to his wife's memory. He would protect this girl with everything he had. He would give her a normal life, a safe life, far away from the darkness he had known. For 3 years, that plan worked perfectly. Kira was now 17, about to start her senior year of high school. She was thinking about college, talking about becoming a nurse like her mother had been before she got sick. She had friends, good grades, and a future full of possibilities. Raymond finally allowed himself to believe that the worst was behind them. Then came that Friday evening. It started like any other night. Raymond was in the kitchen, making dinner. Kira walked in, her car keys already in her hand. "Dad, can I borrow the car?" she asked. "Tiffany needs a ride home from work. Her car broke down." Raymond looked at her. Something felt off. He could not explain it. There was no logical reason to say no. Tiffany was a good friend, someone Kira had known since middle school. The drive was only 15 minutes each way. Kira was a careful driver, always following the rules, but deep in his gut, Raymond felt a warning. It was the same instinct that had saved his life dozens of times in combat. That quiet voice in the back of his mind, telling him that something was wrong. He almost said no, but then he looked at Kira's face. She was smiling, hopeful, just a normal teenager asking her dad for a simple favor. He did not want to be the paranoid father who could not let go of his past. He did not want his old life to control his new one. So he pushed the feeling aside. "Be careful," he said, handing her the keys. "Text me when you get there." Kira smiled and kissed him on the cheek. "Thanks, Dad, I'll be back soon." She walked out the front door, and Raymond watched her get into the car. He stood at the window as she backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. He would replay that moment in his mind 1,000 times in the days to come. The way she waved at him through the window. The way her taillights faded into the evening darkness. The way he had a chance to stop her, to trust his instincts, and he let it slip away. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Raymond checked his phone. No text from Kira. He tried to stay calm. Maybe she forgot. Maybe her phone died. Maybe there was traffic, but that feeling in his gut was getting stronger now, twisting like a knife. He called her phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. He called again. Same thing. His heart started to beat faster. This was not like Kira. She always responded. She knew how much he worried. He was about to grab his keys and drive out to look for her when his phone finally rang. But it was not Kira's number. It was a number he did not recognize. He answered. "Is this the father of Kira Thompson?" A woman's voice asked. It was professional, calm, and somehow that made it worse. "Yes," Raymond said. "Who is this?" "Where is my daughter?" There was a pause on the other end. Just a second or two, but it felt like forever. "Sir, this is Memorial Hospital. Your daughter has been brought in by ambulance. She's been involved in a shooting incident. You need to come right away." The phone slipped from Raymond's hand. For 18 years, he had trained himself to stay calm in the worst situations. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He had completed missions that seemed impossible. He had watched friends die and kept moving forward because that was what the mission required. But in that moment, standing in his quiet kitchen, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. His little girl. His reason for living. Shot. Raymond picked up the phone from the floor. His hands were steady, but inside something was changing. Something old and dangerous was waking up. He grabbed his keys and walked out the door. He did not know who had hurt his daughter. He did not know why. But he was going to find out. And whoever was responsible was about to learn a very important lesson. Some fathers coach softball and attend school plays. Some fathers make pancakes on Sunday mornings and help with homework at night. But some fathers are something else entirely, and Raymond was both. Raymond drove faster than he had ever driven in his life. Red lights meant nothing. Speed limits meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was getting to his daughter. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. A shooting incident. Those words kept echoing in his head. What did that mean? Was she caught in a robbery? Was there an accident? 1,000 possibilities ran through his thoughts, each one worse than the last. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. 15 minutes later, he pulled into the hospital parking lot. He did not bother finding a proper spot. He just stopped the car and ran inside. The emergency room was chaos. People everywhere. Doctors and nurses moving quickly. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. Raymond pushed through the crowd until he reached the front desk. "My daughter," he said, his voice strained. "Kira Thompson. She was brought in." "Shooting victim? Where is she?" The woman behind the desk looked up at him. She could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his face. She typed something into her computer. "She's in surgery right now, sir," she said gently. "The doctor will come speak with you as soon as there's an update. Please have a seat in the waiting area." Surgery. His daughter was in surgery. Raymond felt his legs go weak. He had faced death more times than he could count. He had been shot at, ambushed, and trapped behind enemy lines. None of it compared to this feeling. This helplessness. This not knowing. He found a chair in the corner of the waiting room and sat down. His hands were shaking now. He clasped them together, trying to steady himself. Minutes felt like hours. Every time a doctor walked by, Raymond's heart jumped. Every time a door opened, he looked up hoping for news. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a nurse approached him. "Mr. Thompson?" she asked. He stood up immediately. "Yes, how is she? Is she okay?" The nurse's face was calm but serious. Your daughter is still in surgery. She was shot twice. One bullet hit her shoulder and another grazed her neck. The doctors are working on her right now. She lost a lot of blood, but she's fighting. Raymond closed his eyes. Shot twice. His baby girl had been shot twice. What happened? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Who did this to her? The nurse hesitated. She looked uncomfortable, like she was not sure how much she should say. Sir, there are some police officers here who want to speak with you. They can explain the situation better than I can. Police officers. Raymond's eyes narrowed. Something about this did not feel right. He followed the nurse to a small room off the main hallway. Two men in suits were waiting inside. They were not in uniform, but Raymond could tell immediately they were law enforcement. He had spent enough time around military brass and government officials to recognize the type. Mr. Thompson, one of them said, extending his hand. I'm Detective Warren. This is my partner, Detective Brooks. We're very sorry about what happened to your daughter. Raymond did not shake his hand. He just stood there, waiting. Detective Warren cleared his throat and continued. There was an incident tonight involving your daughter and several officers from the Riverside Police Department. At approximately 7:45 this evening, your daughter's vehicle matched the description of a car involved in an armed robbery 3 towns over. Raymond felt his jaw tighten. What do you mean, matched the description? The license plate reported by a witness was similar to your daughter's plate. One digit was different. It appears there was a miscommunication in the dispatch. Raymond stared at the detective. His voice was dangerously calm. You're telling me that my daughter was shot because someone got a license plate wrong? Detective Warren shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I understand this is difficult to hear. The officers involved believed they were dealing with armed and dangerous suspects. When your daughter reached for something in the car, one of the officers perceived it as a threat and discharged his weapon. Reached for something, Raymond repeated slowly. What did she reach for? Her cell phone, sir. It was on the passenger seat. We believe she was trying to call you. The room went silent. Raymond stood perfectly still. On the outside he looked calm, but inside a storm was building. His daughter, his innocent 17-year-old daughter, had been shot because she reached for her phone to call her father. Where did this happen? Raymond asked. On Miller Road, about 2 miles from your home. The scene is still being processed. Raymond turned and walked out of the room without another word. The detectives called after him, but he did not stop. He did not care about their explanations or their apologies. He needed to see for himself. He got back in his car and drove to Miller Road. When he arrived, the scene looked exactly like he expected. Yellow police tape everywhere. Flashing lights from multiple cruisers. Officers standing around, talking in small groups. And there, in the middle of it all, was his daughter's car. The driver's side window was shattered. Even from a distance, Raymond could see the blood on the seat. His daughter's blood. He parked his car and started walking toward the scene. His steps were slow and deliberate. His eyes were scanning everything, taking in every detail. The position of the police cars, the location of each officer, the angles of approach. Old habits never die. One of the officers noticed him approaching and stepped forward. Sir, you need to stay back. This is an active crime scene. Raymond kept walking. That's my daughter's car. The officer put up his hand. I understand, sir, but you still can't be here. You need to leave. Raymond stopped a few feet away from the tape. He looked at the car again. The shattered glass. The blood. His daughter had been sitting right there, terrified and alone when they opened fire on her. Another officer approached. This one was younger, maybe late 20s. His uniform was crisp and his badge was shiny. He had the look of someone who thought he was in charge. Sir, I'm Officer Reynolds. I'm going to need you to step away from the scene immediately. Raymond turned to face him. He studied the young officer's face. There was something in his eyes, nervousness, guilt. This was one of them. This was one of the men who had shot his daughter. You were there? Raymond said quietly. It was not a question. Officer Reynolds stiffened. Sir, I'm not going to discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. You need to leave now, or I'll have you removed. Raymond did not move. He just kept looking at the officer, his gaze steady and unblinking. My daughter is 17 years old, he said, his voice low and controlled. She was driving to pick up her friend. She did everything right. She kept her hands visible. She followed your instructions. And you shot her for reaching for her phone. Officer Reynolds' hand moved toward his belt, toward his weapon. Sir, I'm warning you. Step back now. The other officers had noticed the confrontation. They started moving closer, forming a semicircle around Raymond, hands on their weapons. Tension thick in the air. Raymond looked at each of them one by one. 4 officers, 4 guns, 4 men who had nearly killed his daughter and were now ready to do the same to him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In his old life, Raymond could have ended this confrontation in seconds. He knew exactly how each of them was standing, where their weapons were positioned, how quickly they could draw. He had taken down rooms full of armed enemies before they even knew he was there, but he was not that man anymore. He had promised himself. He had promised his wife. He had promised his daughter. So instead of fighting, he did something that surprised even himself. He smiled. You don't know who I am? He said softly, looking directly at Officer Reynolds. But you will. I promise you that. Then he turned around and walked back to his car. The officers watched him go, confused and unsettled. They did not understand what had just happened. They did not understand the threat that had just walked away from them, but soon they would understand everything. Raymond drove back to the hospital with a fire burning inside him. But it was not the wild, uncontrolled fire of rage. It was something colder, something more focused, the kind of fire that burns slow and steady until it consumes everything in its path. He had spent 18 years learning how to be patient, how to wait for the right moment, how to plan every move before taking action. Those skills had kept him alive in the most dangerous places on earth. Now, he would use them for something far more personal. When he arrived at the hospital, he went straight to the surgical waiting area. A doctor was already looking for him. Mr. Thompson? The doctor asked. Raymond nodded. His heart was pounding, but his face showed nothing. Your daughter made it through surgery, the doctor said. She's stable now. Raymond let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. For a moment, everything else faded away. His daughter was alive. She was going to survive. The bullet in her shoulder caused some damage to the nerves and muscles, the doctor continued. We were able to remove it, but she's going to need physical therapy. It will be a long recovery. The wound on her neck was less serious. A few inches to the left, and he paused, not finishing the sentence. He did not need to. Raymond understood. A few inches to the left, and he would be planning a funeral instead of a recovery. Can I see her? Raymond asked. She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes. I'll have a nurse take you to her room. A few minutes later, Raymond was sitting beside his daughter's bed. She looked so small lying there. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped and hummed. Her shoulder was wrapped in thick bandages. Her face was pale, but peaceful. He reached out and took her hand. It was warm. She was alive. I'm here, sweetheart, he whispered. Daddy's here. And I'm not going anywhere. He sat with her for hours, watching her breathe, watching the monitors, watching the door. Old habits. Even in a hospital room, he was always watching. Sometime around 3 a.m, Kira's eyes fluttered open. Dad? She said, her voice weak and scratchy. Raymond leaned closer, squeezing her hand gently. I'm right here, baby. Don't try to move. You're safe now. Kira blinked a few times, trying to focus. Confusion filled her eyes. What happened? She asked. I remember ... lights, police lights. They told me to stop. I did everything they said, Dad. I put my hands up. I didn't move. Her voice started to shake. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes. I was so scared. I just wanted to call you. I reached for my phone and then I heard the shots. I felt something hit me, and then everything went dark. Raymond listened, his jaw tight. Every word she spoke added fuel to the fire inside him. You didn't do anything wrong, he said firmly. None of this is your fault. Do you understand me? None of it, Kira nodded weakly. A tear rolled down her cheek. I thought I was going to die, she whispered. I thought I would never see you again. Raymond felt his heart break into a million pieces. His daughter, his little girl, had faced death because of someone else's mistake. Someone else's carelessness. Someone else's fear. He wiped the tear from her cheek and kissed her forehead. You're going to be okay, he said. I promise. And the people who did this to you are going to answer for it. I promise you that too. Over the next several days, Raymond stayed by Kira's side as much as possible. But when she slept, he worked. He started by gathering information. He needed to know exactly what had happened and who was responsible. The detectives had given him a basic story, but Raymond knew there was more. There was always more. He made phone calls. Not to lawyers or journalists. Not yet. First, he called his brothers. His real brothers. The men he had served with for nearly 2 decades. In the special operations community, bonds are formed that last a lifetime. These men had bled together, fought together, and saved each other's lives more times than they could count. When one of them called for help, the others answered. No questions asked, within 48 hours. Raymond had assembled a team unlike any other. There was Davis, a former SEAL who now worked as a private investigator. He specialized in finding things that people wanted to stay hidden. There was Martinez, who had left the military to become a civil rights attorney. He had a reputation for taking on cases that no one else would touch, and winning, and there was Colonel Bishop, a retired officer who still had connections in every branch of government. If something was being covered up, he would find out. Raymond explained the situation to each of them. They listened without interruption. When he finished, there was no hesitation. We're in, Davis said. Whatever you need. The others agreed. Raymond's first target was the police department's official story. They claimed that the officers had followed proper procedure. They claimed that Kira had made a threatening movement. They claimed that the shooting was justified, but Raymond knew that stories could be manufactured. Evidence could be hidden. The truth could be buried. He asked Davis to dig deeper. Did not take long. Within a week, Davis had uncovered some troubling facts. The department claimed that their body cameras had malfunctioned during the incident. All 4 officers. At the same time. The footage was supposedly corrupted and unrecoverable. Raymond did not believe in coincidences. Davis also found that Officer Reynolds, the man Raymond had confronted at the scene, had a history. 2 previous complaints of excessive force, both of which had been quietly dismissed. A pattern of aggressive behavior that the department had chosen to ignore. But the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. A woman who lived on Miller Road had been driving home that night. She had a dashcam in her car, and she had recorded everything. The footage showed Kira's car surrounded by police cruisers. It showed the officers approaching with weapons drawn. It showed Kira with her hands raised, clearly visible through the windshield. And it showed her reaching slowly toward the passenger seat, moving carefully, not making any sudden movements. Then the shots came. 3 of them. And Kira slumped forward. The woman had been too scared to come forward at first. But when she saw the news reports claiming that Kira had made threatening movements, she knew something was wrong. She reached out to a local journalist, and that journalist happened to know Martinez. Now Raymond had proof. He sat in his daughter's hospital room, watching the footage on his laptop. His face was stone. His eyes were cold. But inside, that slow-burning fire had grown into something powerful. The police department thought they could make this go away. They thought they could hide behind their badges and their official statements. They thought that a quiet single father from the suburbs would simply accept their version of events and move on. They were wrong. Raymond closed his laptop and looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully in her bed. She was a fighter. She had survived, and now it was his turn to fight for her. He picked up his phone and called Martinez. "It's time," he said. Let's show them who they're dealing with. The police department had no idea what was coming. They had made a terrible mistake that night on Miller Road, but their biggest mistake was not the shooting itself. Their biggest mistake was thinking they could get away with it. They had messed with the wrong father. And now they were about to learn what happens when a Navy SEAL goes to war, not with bullets and bombs, but with something even more powerful, the truth. The next 2 weeks were the busiest of Raymond's life since leaving the military. But this time, he was not planning a combat mission. He was planning something far more effective. He was going to destroy them with the truth. Martinez, the civil rights attorney, took the lead on the legal side. He filed a federal lawsuit against the police department, the city, and each of the 4 officers involved in the shooting. The lawsuit accused them of excessive force, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to cover up evidence. When the paperwork hit the courthouse, it landed like a bomb, but that was just the beginning. Davis, the private investigator, had been working around the clock. He tracked down every piece of information he could find about the officers involved. Their training records, their disciplinary files, their social media accounts, everything. What he found painted a disturbing picture. Officer Reynolds, the one who had pulled the trigger, had been flagged multiple times during his career. Fellow officers had raised concerns about his temper. Supervisors had noted his tendency to escalate situations instead of calming them down. But nothing was ever done. The complaints were filed away and forgotten. The other 3 officers had similar patterns. Minor incidents swept under the rug. Warnings that were never followed up on. A culture of protection that valued loyalty over accountability. Davis compiled everything into a detailed report. It was not just about what happened to Kira. It was about a system that allowed it to happen. Meanwhile, Colonel Bishop was working his connections. He made calls to people in Washington, people who had the power to ask questions that could not be ignored. Questions about federal funding for police departments. Questions about oversight and accountability. Questions that made certain officials very nervous. Within days, Raymond started getting phone calls from the city, the mayor's office, the police chief. They wanted to talk. They wanted to settle. Raymond refused every single one. He was not interested in a quiet settlement. He was not interested in money. He wanted accountability. He wanted change. And he wanted everyone to see exactly what had happened to his daughter. The dashcam footage was the key to everything. Martinez worked with a journalist named Helen Chun, a reporter known for her fearless investigations into police misconduct. She had won awards for her work and had a reputation for being fair but relentless. Raymond met with her personally. He told her Kira's story. He showed her the footage. He gave her access to everything Davis had uncovered. Helen watched the dashcam video 3 times without saying a word. When it ended, she looked at Raymond with fire in her eyes. "This is going to change everything," she said. "When can I publish?" "As soon as you're ready," Raymond replied. 3 days later, the story broke. Helen's article was published online first, along with the dashcam footage. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. It spread across social media like wildfire. News stations picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Everyone was watching, and what they saw made them angry. The video was clear and undeniable. Kira's car surrounded by police, her hands raised, visible through the windshield. The officers approaching with weapons drawn. Kira slowly reaching toward the passenger seat, moving carefully, not making any sudden movements. Then the shots. People watched a 17-year-old girl get shot for reaching for her phone. They watched her slump forward in her seat, bleeding and alone. And they watched the officers stand there afterward, not rushing to help her, not calling for medical assistance right away. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests began outside the police station. Not violent protests, but powerful ones. Hundreds of people holding signs, demanding justice for Kira, demanding accountability for the officers, demanding change. The police department tried to control the narrative. They released a statement saying they were conducting an internal investigation. They asked the public to remain calm and let the process work, but people had seen the video. They knew what had happened, and they were not going to let it be swept away. The pressure kept building. Politicians, who had been silent, suddenly found their voices. They called for independent investigations. They demanded transparency. They talked about reform and accountability. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave. Then, as more details came out, Officer Reynolds was suspended without pay. The union protested, but for once, the department did not back down. Raymond watched all of this unfold from his daughter's hospital room. Kira was getting stronger every day. She was sitting up now, eating solid food, even smiling sometimes. But she was also watching the news. She saw the protests. She saw her own face on television. She heard people chanting her name. "Dad," she said one afternoon, her voice quiet, "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to pick up Tiffany from work." Raymond sat beside her and took her hand. "I know, sweetheart," he said. "None of this is your fault. You did nothing wrong. And what's happening out there, those people standing up for you, they're not just fighting for you. They're fighting for every person who's ever been treated unfairly. They're fighting for change." Kira thought about that for a moment. "Do you think it will actually change anything?" she asked. Raymond looked at his daughter. She was so young, and yet she had already seen so much darkness in the world. He wished he could protect her from all of it. But he knew that was not possible. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we have to try. If we don't fight for what's right, nothing will ever get better." Kira nodded slowly. There was something different in her eyes now. A strength that had not been there before. "Then let's fight," she said. 2 weeks after the story broke, the district attorney announced that Officer Reynolds would be charged with aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. It was not everything Raymond wanted, but it was a start. An officer being held criminally responsible for a wrongful shooting was rare. It almost never happened, but this time there was no hiding. There was no covering up. The whole world had seen the truth. The trial would come later. The civil lawsuit would continue. The fight for broader reform would take years, but something had shifted. The police department announced new policies. Mandatory de-escalation training. Updated rules for use of force. Body cameras that could not be turned off during encounters with civilians. Independent review of all shooting incidents. It was not perfect. It was not enough. But it was progress. Raymond stood outside the hospital on the day Kira was finally discharged. She was in a wheelchair, her arm in a sling, but she insisted on leaving through the front door, where a small crowd had gathered to support her. People clapped and cheered as she came out. Strangers who had never met her, but who had been moved by her story. Kira looked overwhelmed, but she managed a small wave with her good hand. Raymond pushed her wheelchair toward their car. As they passed through the crowd, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, reached out and handed Kira a flower. "Thank you for being brave," the little girl said. Kira took the flower and smiled. For a moment, all the pain and fear seemed to fade away. Raymond loaded her into the car and got behind the wheel. Before he started the engine, he looked at his daughter. "You ready to go home?" he asked. Kira looked at the flower in her hand. Then she looked at her father. "Yeah," she said. "But this isn't over, is it?" Raymond shook his head. "No," he said. "It's not. But the hardest part is behind us. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." He started the car and pulled away from the hospital. In the rearview mirror, he could see the crowd still watching, still cheering. They had won the first battle. But Raymond knew the war was far from over, and he was ready for whatever came next. 1 year later, Raymond sat in a crowded courtroom, waiting for the moment he had been fighting for since that terrible night on Miller Road. The trial of Officer Reynolds had lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses had testified. Experts had analyzed the footage. Lawyers had argued back and forth. And through it all, Raymond had been there, sitting in the front row, watching every moment. Kira sat beside him. Her arm had healed, though she still went to physical therapy twice a week. The doctors said she might never regain full strength in her shoulder. Her dream of playing softball in college was over. But she had found new dreams, new purposes that she never expected. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Supporters who had followed the case from the beginning sat wherever they could find space. Outside, a crowd had gathered, waiting for the verdict. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Then they sat back down in heavy silence. Raymond watched as the jury filed in. 12 ordinary people who had been given an extraordinary responsibility. They had seen the evidence. They had heard the testimony. Now they would decide if justice would be served. The jury foreman stood. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He held a piece of paper in his hands. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied. Raymond felt Kira reach for his hand. He held it tight. "On the charge of aggravated assault," the foreman read, "we find the defendant guilty." A gasp went through the courtroom. Then murmurs. Then something that sounded almost like a wave of relief. Raymond closed his eyes. Guilty, after everything they had been through. After all, the fighting and waiting and hoping. The system had actually worked. He felt Kira squeeze his hand harder. When he looked at her, tears were streaming down her face. But she was smiling. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We actually did it." Raymond pulled her into a hug, careful not to put pressure on her shoulder. He held her for a long moment right there in the courtroom. While cameras flashed and people talked around them, Officer Reynolds sat motionless at the defense table. His face was pale. His eyes were empty. For years, he had operated without consequences, protected by a system that looked the other way. Now that protection was gone. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Reynolds was taken into custody immediately. He would await his fate behind bars just like any other criminal. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers when the verdict was announced. People hugged each other. Some cried. Others chanted Kira's name. Raymond and Kira walked out together, surrounded by Martinez and the rest of the team that had made this possible. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones were thrust in their direction. Raymond did not say much. He never liked being the center of attention. But Kira stopped at the top of the courthouse steps and looked out at the crowd. She was different now. Not just physically, but in every way. The scared girl who had reached for her phone on a dark road was gone. In her place was a young woman who had faced the worst and come out stronger. "I want to thank everyone who supported us," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This was never just about me. It was about everyone who has ever been treated unfairly, everyone who has been ignored or silenced. Today we showed that the truth matters, that accountability matters, and that when ordinary people stand together, we can change things." The crowd cheered again. Raymond watched his daughter with pride swelling in his chest. She had grown so much in the past year. She had taken her pain and turned it into purpose. A few weeks later, Officer Reynolds was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It was less than Raymond had hoped for, but more than many expected. It was the first time in the county's history that an officer had been sent to prison for a wrongful shooting. The civil lawsuit was settled shortly after. The city agreed to pay a significant amount in damages, but more importantly, they agreed to implement sweeping reforms in the police department. Independent oversight, better training, stricter accountability. Everything Raymond and his team had demanded. It would not bring back what Kira had lost. It would not erase the nightmares she still had sometimes. But it might prevent another family from going through the same thing, and that mattered. As the months passed, life slowly returned to something like normal. Raymond went back to his quiet routines. Mowing the lawn, walking to the mailbox, watching old movies on Sunday nights, but things were different now. He was different. He had spent 18 years as a weapon of war, doing things in the shadows that most people would never know about. He had thought that part of his life was over when he retired. He had thought he would never fight again, but he had been wrong. The fight had found him, and he had won not with violence, but with something far more powerful: patience, strategy, truth, the same skills that had made him one of the best operators in the world had made him one of the most effective advocates for justice. He smiled sometimes, thinking about how surprised his old commanders would be. the silent warrior fighting courtroom battles and giving interviews. It was not the ending anyone would have predicted, but it was the right one. Kira graduated from high school that spring. She walked across the stage with her arm still slightly weaker than it used to be, but her head held high. Raymond sat in the audience, clapping louder than anyone. She had been accepted to several colleges, but she had made her choice months ago. She was going to study criminal justice. She wanted to become a lawyer, someone who could fight for people who could not fight for themselves. You could have chosen anything, Raymond told her the night before she left for college. They were sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset. Medicine, business, anything. Kira shook her head. This is what I'm supposed to do, Dad. I know it now. What happened to me was terrible, but it showed me something. The system is broken in so many ways, but it can be fixed, and I want to be part of fixing it. Raymond looked at his daughter. She was so much like her mother, strong, compassionate, determined. Your mom would be so proud of you, he said quietly. Kira smiled. She'd be proud of you too. You could have handled this differently. You could have used your skills in other ways, but you didn't. You showed me that the right way to fight is with the truth. Raymond nodded slowly. He had thought about that many times over the past year. In his old life, he had solved problems with force. Quick, efficient, final. Part of him had wanted to handle this the same way, especially in those first dark hours after learning his daughter had been shot, but he had made a choice. A choice to be better. A choice to fight the right way, and it had made all the difference. I learned something too, he said finally. I spent so many years being a weapon. I thought that was all I knew how to be. But you taught me that strength isn't just about what you can destroy. It's about what you can build, what you can protect, what you can change. Kira leaned over and hugged him. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world. They sat together in comfortable silence as the last light of the day faded into darkness. Tomorrow, Kira would leave for college. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin. But tonight, they were just a father and daughter, grateful to be alive, grateful to be together, and ready for whatever the future would bring. Some battles are fought with weapons. Some are fought with words. And some are fought simply by refusing to give up, no matter how hard things get. Raymond had fought all three kinds in his life. But the battle he was most proud of was the one he had fought for his daughter, because in the end, that was the only battle that truly mattered.